Hello. Hello, hello, hello. Welcome to Casual Krakoa. Getting started here shortly. Hey, everybody, thanks for joining. Let's do this. Got a lot of good comics to talk about today. Thanks, everybody, for hopping on. I'm Dave. We're going to start a Casual Krakoa here and go through Cable number 12, Sword number 7, and Wolverine number 14. Before I do so, everybody joining live, first off, thanks so much for joining. Let me know if things are coming through visual and audio okay here. Let me know in the chat. Greatly appreciate any feedback and for hopping on today. And then we will get to it. Just going to pull up the old notes and we'll get to it without delay. All right. The main question that I am looking for today for answers here in the chat is, was Kid Cable worth it? Okay, we have the final issue of Cable by Gerry, Duggan, and Phil Noto out today. The question we will be questioning, we will be dissecting today, is, was the Kid Cable era worth it? Was this series worth it? Where did it get us? What did it do now that we have perhaps the return of Old Man Cable? As I get into the comics here, let's note that, hey, let's keep the chat friendly and clean, all right? It doesn't literally need to be clean. I don't want to police your cursing, if that's how you like to speak, but keep it respectful, keep it polite. And also the super chat is open. Anyone who likes the Comic Book Herald YouTube channel, podcast, and website, you can contribute via super chat here on YouTube. That will make the question pop out for me. I will prioritize anything I see there, and also your support is greatly, greatly appreciated. Any donations that come in through Super Chat will get funneled directly back into future Comic Book Herald endeavors. And again, it means things like I can make more videos, I can pay more excellent contributors on comicbookherald.com, stuff like that, right? So that is all appreciated. And what else? What else is a formality? Oh, spoilers will almost certainly follow. If you have not read any of the comics today, I'm going to talk about them. I'm going to talk about what happened, and you may hear things that happened, because that is what happens when you talk about the stories. I will try to be, I try not to give away major plot turns if there are certain things here, but again, we're going to talk about the comics as if you are familiar primarily. So, all right, if we're coming through clearly and I'm not seeing any issues, then I'm going to dig right into it. Keep those answers coming on, was Kid Cable worth it? Keep your own questions coming. I already got a couple right off the bat, but otherwise, let's formally begin. Casual Krakoa. Hello, and welcome to Casual Krakoa. I'm Dave Busing, founder and editor-in-chief of comicbookherald.com. You are listening to an X-Men comics recap where we're going to go through all the X-Men comics that came out today, July 28th, 2021. In particular, Cable number 12, the final issue in the Cable now 12-issue series. We're going to talk about Sword number 7, which is the Last Annihilation tie-in, a tie-in to an Al Ewing written Marvel Cosmic sort of mini event, and then Wolverine number 14, which for my money was the most interesting Wolverine has been in a minute. I liked what was happening there. I liked all three of these comics. Didn't love them. I liked all three of them, and had a pretty good week reading X Comics. Again, as I talked about in previous Casual Krakoas, we are in sort of a down period. We are in a lull, a calm before the storm, right? We're between a Hellfire Gala where lots of stuff happened. Mutants terraform Mars. They now have, that is now Planet Oraco, the capital of the Sol System. And of course, we're in between that, the Hellfire Gala, and Inferno coming via, head of X, architect of X-Men right now, Jonathan Hickman, in the coming months, right? And then we've got Trial of Magneto. We've got some big stuff coming down the line. But right now, we're this is the moment where everyone who likes slice of life stuff, where everyone who likes these moments in between big splashy events has a chance potentially to see what their favorite series are doing, what their favorite characters are doing. That's what's going on in X-Men comics, and that's what we're seeing to some degree here today, although not entirely. Like Cable number 12 is the final issue in that series, and we'll talk about what that means. Like I said, Wolverine number 14 kicks off a new arc, so that's actually setting the stage for new things to come in that title, whereas Sword number 7 is kind of continuing Al Ewing's grand architecture, tapestry of Marvel Cosmic, where he is now quite clearly the lone leader of Marvel Cosmic. And I think I and many, many others would agree that is for the best for Marvel. That is a good thing in a post-King in Black landscape. Donny Cates had his shot. Donny Cates had his shot at kind of shaping Marvel Cosmic, and it was all pretty insular. It was all pretty tied to what he was doing in his own books, with the exception of King of Black, which spilled over into everything for too long, for much too long. In comic terms, if you're reading these things week to week, Al Ewing, I think, is a better fit for a Marvel Cosmic Architect, and that's what we're seeing in The Last Annihilation and in Sword number 7. But that's not where we're going to start. We are going to start with Cable number 12. Was Kid Cable worth it? It has been nearly 3 years since Extermination, the X-Men event, ended. That was late 2018, okay? That was pre-House of X, pre-Powers of 10. That was before it was ever announced officially that Jonathan Hickman was coming over to take over the X-Men and usher in this fascinating new era. That event, Extermination, there were basically 2 takeaways from Extermination, which was a 5-issue event. Again, coming at... It wasn't literally the end, because Age of X-Men is kind of the end of that era, but it's coming at a time period when, like, the X-Men books, comics are just totally rudderless, okay? If you came to the party with House of X and Powers of 10, as a lot of readers did, and you came in at the right time, but you missed the lost years, right? You missed the wandering X-Men line, not really having a central hub, not really having a purpose in a lot of ways, you know, and just kind of wandering around. And one of the more aimless things that happened during this time period was something that Brian Michael Bendis kicked off in his all-new X-Men comics, which was a series he launched with Marvel Now circa 2012. And one thing he did there, in a series that is not without its merits, there are interesting moments from that run. I'm not, like, totally out on the Bendis era of all-new X-Men, but one thing he does especially is he basically just said, to hell with time travel. Like, any logic, any ways that this could be, that we could make sense of this, to hell with it. We're just going to bring in the original X-Men as teenagers, and they were in the Marvel Universe from 2012 until Extermination in 2018, right? And what the event does is really, it's just a way to say, how do we get them out of here in a way that feels like it's not breaking absolutely everything? And that's the main purpose of the event. But the other thing it does that has actually been longer lasting and kind of more impactful here in the House and Powers and Hickman era of X-Men is it had Teen Cable come from a point in time in Nathan Summers' life, in Cable's life, when he was like a young warrior, like a young teenager, comes from the future, comes back in time, because Cable's timey-wimey, right? He hops all around, and he kills his old man self. The Cable that we had followed in Marvel Comics up to that point, who, of course, had traveled the time stream, but we have seen many, many adventures of, because there have been many, many Cable stories. He kills that version, and basically it brought into the Marvel U, like, okay, the version of Cable that we have now, he's a teenager, and he needs to experience all these things for himself for the first time. He is not the time-tested, battle-worn warrior that we have come to know. I don't know. Very few decisions in X-Men have had like a lower approval rating, I think. You know, certainly initially. I mean, I think part of this is X-Men fans, comics fans, people in general are averse to change, right? So that's a part of it. But also, like, there's a bad history of trying to make characters cool or trying to make characters interesting by making them young and hip, right? You have famously in the 1990s when Avengers was totally rudderless, post like Avengers Operation Galactic Storm, going into the Crossing, you have teenage Tony Stark, and that's become a punchline in many, many ways. May get some renewed lease on life with all the King the Conqueror stuff going on in the Marvel Cinematic Universe. But nonetheless, like that's looked down upon. I think, you know, Marvel perpetually kind of trying to like bring youth back to Peter Parker, I think, is a thing that has really worn on fans, where a lot of readers, myself included today, were like, actually, you know, the stuff that I've liked the most about Spider-Man in the 2000s is like when he grows up a bit, you know, when he actually has some maturity and becomes a teacher or marries Mary Jane and actually, you know, is a married crime fighter or whatever it is, right? But Teen Cable has shades of that, and I think that's why a lot of fans were pretty averse to the change. Now, the challenge for Gerry Duggan and Phil Noto and Joe Sabino, the creative team here, when Cable was announced, knowing they were going to do a Teen Cable book, was basically, and I think Gerry Duggan had literally said this, I don't know if it was at C2E2 when the book was announced or if it was later, but literally said, like, I'm going to make you care about young Cable, right? That was the challenge, was just to make fans be like, okay, this is actually okay. So the question is, did they succeed? Did Duggan, did Noto, did Sabino, did they succeed in making us care about Teen Cable in such a way where it's like, oh, actually having those 12 issues focused on Cable, and again, it's like, not every character gets a solo run. Actually, most characters don't. You know, Storm hasn't had a solo book. We have a lot of cool characters. Nightcrawler, although Way of X is kind of changing that, right? There's a lot of cool characters who haven't had... Dupe has not had his solo yet, right? At the expense of Dupe, we got 12 issues of Cable, and one wonders, was it worth it? I think big picture, for my money, this book is fine. Like, it's okay. It's solid. I'm going to start with what I liked. I'm going to start with what I liked about Cable number 1 to number 12. And then we can get into sort of whether or not it was all worth it. What I liked about Cable number 1 to number 12. And first off, let me just say, well, no, this will tie into what I liked. What I liked about this book, consistent creative team, okay? Gerry Duggan, Phil Noto, Joe Sabino do the whole thing. They do all 12 issues. There weren't really massive delays. You got Phil Noto interiors, inking himself and doing everything himself artistically. And that's great. I love that. I wish we saw more of that in comics runs, even if it means they can only do 12 issues. You know, like I think there's a sort of, there's a rotating cast of characters artistically across some of the better books right now. Sword, for example, where we see Valerio Schiti coming off and we see Stefano Caselli coming on with Sword number 7. Good artists, both of them, but I like it. I think just fans in general like consistency in creative units, and Cable brought that to the table, which is very, very appealing. You know, and I think that's going to be a big thing that challenges X-Men, is like the new relaunch with Gerry Duggan writing and Pepe Larraz and Marty Gracia on art. The question of like, okay, are Larraz and Gracia going to be on this for even 10 issues in a row? Or, can we do them on 4, give them a break for 1 or 2, and then do 4 more, right? Can there at least a cadence of consistency? I think that's increasingly important. And I think X-Men has the line Dawn of X, Reign of X has been pretty good about that to date, like mostly if you're talking about any of the runs, like if we're talking about Excalibur, it's Marcus Toe's book for the most part, right? If you're talking about X-Force, there's a lot of Joshua Cassara in there, same with Rod Race on the rebooted New Mutants, although again, recently, it's like the last couple issues, you missed that. So that consistency was very appealing with Cable. It feels like a tight, intentional 12 issues. And I think that ties into the second piece of this, which is Cable's an incredibly easy, fast-paced book. It's the lightest on its feet of the entire X-Men line from the Dawn of X. Every issue, I think in some ways this could be a negative, right? And it's something I've talked about as a criticism in some of the videos on the earlier issues, is like these issues are slight. They are sort of weightless in some ways, and that can be disappointing. But I also think the fact that it knew it was 12 and done, it got in and out, it told its story, it didn't mess around, that feels right here. That feels right. They didn't waste time, they didn't dilly-dally too much, necessarily. And it's a tight, easy read. And that's not like a super high compliment, obviously, right? If you're saying like, oh yeah, I love this TV show, I can have it on in the background and not pay attention to it. Like, that's not super high praise, but it's kind of comics comfort food type stuff. And again, that can be used as both a pejorative and a positive. I'm saying it here in retrospect somewhat positively. I like the consistency and the ease of Kid Cable, of a 12-issue focused on Kid Cable, because like this didn't need to be a book with too much meat on the bones. There's a version of Cable that could be that, but that version is Old Man Cable. That's the Cable that I want to see a heck of a lot more of, right? And I want to really get into the nitty-gritty and the details. With Kid Cable, I didn't need that, and you kind of can't do that because the character doesn't have the history. They don't have the longevity and the legacy and all of the sort of like different future eras that you can tap into, okay? And that ties into the one thing that I think Duggan and Noto did very smartly here, basically making this a book about the Summers family. Like Kid Cable, what it does is it gives us the Summers family dynamics, and this is something that writer Jonathan Hickman tapped into quite a bit in his run on X-Men, which went for 21 issues. Actually having a Summers family unit where you had Dad Klops and Jean Grey and their kids, Rachel Summers and young Nathan Summers, that's a thing we've like never gotten to enjoy in the Marvel Universe. Because if you know the history of Cable, you know that Nathan Summers, the child actually of Scott Summers and Jean Grey's clone, Madeline Pryor, was taken from them, right? Was infected with a techno-organic virus during the Inferno event. The baby was taken to the future by the Ascani, by a future version of a Rachel Summers, right? There's all sorts of then time travel that immediately becomes a part of Cable's like person, but you never got Scott and Jean raising teenage Cable. And that element was actually really nice, as we've seen so much of, especially the Dawn of X, really leaning into like Scott Summers as a dad, and Scott Summers is like getting to actually, in some ways, rehabilitate his image as like actually a decent family member because historically he's like second only to Professor X in terms of being the worst, right? So I think the fact that we got to see that was fun, that was enjoyable, and I think all of those are positives, right? And then I think you have to consider too, what was the advantage of not having Old Man Cable around through House of X and Powers of 10? Like, what was the advantage of not having him there? And I don't know exactly how intentional this was. Like Ed Brisson wrote Extermination. He was in on the X-Office writer's room because he was writing New Mutants, which there's like a collective amnesia about the existence of the Brisson and Flaviano run prior to Vita Ayala and Roder Ace. For good reason. That book was really struggling. But I don't know how intentional it was, if that was something they planned, where like, hey, we need to get rid of Cable. But even if they didn't plan it, you have to look at like, okay, what was the advantage? And the advantage, I think, was the knowledge. If you have Old Man Cable, you're running into this question, which you run into today in Cable number 12, of the knowledge of the future. How much of a conundrum is that for Moira McTaggart? Again, we still don't really know. We know Moira is opposed to precogs, possibly because she wants no precognitive mutants because that'll ruin her plans, possibly because she is specifically enemies with Destiny. And mutants like a blindfold just sort of get caught in the crossfire. But would a Cable, an Old Man Cable, who seems to know a lot about the futures, would he have created an immediate problem for Moira's plans, for Krakoa, and for this era of X-Men, right? We don't know this, but the way that the notorious OMC, Old Man Cable, talks about Krakoa, it is very possible he knows what Moira, Charles, and Magneto are planning. Like, the way he talks about it today, in Cable number 12, when he tells Basic Cable, the Krakoan age changed everything for the better, and you changed the future for the better, like he knows the outcomes, or at least he thinks he knows the outcomes. I don't know. Like when you're talking about future timelines, it seems like we always potentially run into the challenge of like, oh, is this actually how it played out? Or is this one of many? That's always a question. But the way it's presented, it sounds like Old Man Cable's like, yeah, I've seen Krakoa. I know about it. It's great. It rules. But we still got to do the work to like ensure that it is successful. And if that's true, and we have Old Man Cable, and he knows all that, then he knows the Moira Charles Magneto big secret, right? And in keeping him out of the Dawn of X, you avoid having that other character who kind of is in on the details and can push them in another direction, right? You have full-on secrecy so that you can now have it blow up in everyone's faces with Emma Frost and Mystique and Destiny in Inferno in this event coming, right? Which I fully expect the event to be heavily about, like Emma Frost being like, hey, I know what you're up to, and it's a problem, and here's what I'm going to do about it, right? If you have a character like Old Man Cable, those secrets drop so much earlier, right? And you're kind of pushed to an Inferno faster probably than you're ready for. So I actually think there's probably a pretty decent advantage to not having Cable around in the early start, right? We have this kid Cable who is super unsure of himself. And again, he's just a teenager. He just wants to like have fun and date Stepford cuckoos and do wild things on Krakoa, and find big swords. Like, like he's not a planner. He's not a wizened old warrior who has been part of the X-Men and part of the Avengers, et cetera, et cetera. So in that way, it kind of makes sense. It actually fits into the Krakoa era. Whether it made for better comics or not, whether it meant that character needed a solo story, that's still debatable. But like in terms of the general decision making, I get it. And then the other thing you avoided too, the advantage of not having Old Man Cable is you kind of avoid and you kind of change the Cable apocalypse dynamics. So like we know since I don't know exactly when it's revealed, Executioner song maybe in 1992, Cable and Apocalypse have beef. Right? These are characters who have beef. They have future timelines where they have been at war with each other. If they're coming together on Krakoa at the same time, there's animosity and there's a relationship there that I actually think would be pretty interesting to see fleshed out in further detail. I would love to see now a returned Old Man Cable visit Amenth and talk to Apocalypse and have a conversation. I actually think that would be a really cool issue. But at the start of things, it's pretty good to have, again, this teen Cable who doesn't know anything. He doesn't know anything better, to just kind of look up to Apocalypse and just be like, yeah, you tell me what to do because you're an adult and I'm a kid. And that actually worked decently in the Krakoa era, I think, right? So I think all that worked. But again, like none of that really says that, oh, we needed a Cable series. We needed a Kid Cable series. And again, it made me appreciate the Summers family dynamics. I do like Kid Cable more through this era of the Krakoa comics and Cable number 1 to 12 by Duggan and Noto than I did going into this. Going into this, you had Extermination, and then you had Brisson writing X-Force with Teen Cable, and there's kind of a strifey story in there. And that stuff, I think that there's some really good Dylan Burnett art, if I'm not mistaken. But that arc's, it's fine. It's fine. And that's, I guess, kind of all this stuff kind of netting out and just like, there's nothing super spectacular here. I like Phil Noto's art a lot. So for me, 12 issues of breezy Phil Noto art is good to look at. Would I want to be shelling out $4 a month for that for any longer period of time? No, I wouldn't. I'm happy it's done. I'm glad it was 12 issues and out. And again, so like spoilers here if you haven't read it and somehow are like not reading the tea leaves, but this issue ends with, the official, like Old Man Cable's already back going into Cable number 12, but now the status quo is Old Man Cable's back. He's staying for some time in our Earth 616, primary timeline. And Teen Cable does not die. Like, he's not gone. It's not like, oh, we resurrected Old Man Cable, we have to get rid of Teen Cable. Exactly, but he goes back to his own time. Young Cable, Teen Cable, goes back to his own time because Old Man Cable's like, hey, we need to basically fight the war against strife on multiple fronts. Like, we need to be in multiple timelines. You need to be back in your teenage timeline, growing and going through all the paces that I went through, and I need to be here fighting against whatever strife's got planned next. And that's fine. That's fine. I thought it's a solid ending. It's a solid series. It's not great. I don't think it's super special. I would be interested / surprised in readers who are like, yeah, Cable was my favorite book. Like that's not commentary. That's not thinking that I'm hearing a heck of a lot of. I just don't think it has that potential. And that's actually, I talked about this a little bit with X-Men number 1, but like that's one of my concerns with Gerry Duggan as the main X-Men writer, essentially. I don't know. It's going to be more critical maybe than is fair, but it's like Gerry Duggan doesn't write a lot of people's favorite comics. He writes good comics often. He's written Image comics that I think are really underrated. But his Marvel work is often like pretty good, which is fine. But if you're leaning a franchise more in a direction where he's like kind of the architect, kind of a driver, I feel like that's not a good place for X-Men to be, which is why I feel great about the fact that, like, obviously Hickman is still the head of X, and you have writers who I trust a lot more, like a Cy Spurrier, like an Al Ewing, even an up-and-comer like a Leah Williams. Those are writers who I think have a lot more potential to be writing like, oh, that's my favorite book. I've never said that about a Duggan comic, and I hope to be wrong and start saying that about X-Men, for example, but Cable just never had that potential. It just never, or maybe it had that potential, it just never got there. It's tight, it's easy, it's breezy, it's fine. And that is, that's, if you're a huge Cable fan, that's probably a little disappointing, because probably not going to have a Cable book for a minute, with the exception of one thing that I'll talk about in a second. So, all right. At the end of this, I guess, actually, before we talk about the end of the comic, let's talk about one thing here. This book is it skirts kind of the big questions, kind of I don't know, cowardly. It's a little strong, but it's like it doesn't want to actually address the big questions in the room. Okay, and the big questions in the room are what does Old Man Cable know about Krakoa? And I already read the quote where he says to Basic Cable, like, the Krakoan age changed everything, but he's dodging knowledge of the future. He's basically like, I know the future, but it doesn't matter. We still have to do what we have to do. Just fight hard to make it happen. But like, why exactly? Like, why exactly are we dodging this? Is this something where it's just Old Man Cable's ethos? Is there something where he knows, like there's an implication here again that like he knows what Moira's going to do ultimately, right? Like Cable has been hundreds and thousands and far into the future. Like he probably knows what the big plan is, whether it's something to do with the Phalanx, whether it's something to do with, these Dominion societies, right? Whatever these things are, Old Man Cable probably knows. And he seems cool with it, at least in this very, very short conversation. I don't know. That's the thing I'd like to see more of. Again, like it's been really overlooked, both with Old Man Cable now in the Cable and also in the other Duggan written series, Marauders, with Bishop. These characters are kind of just like not talking about the futures that they know to come to pass. And that's actually very out of character, especially for Bishop. And I've talked about this previously. So I thought that was like, skirting the issue a bit. I also think too, like, okay, with Strife at the end of this. So it's actually a very fun and pretty funny plot here. They have Strife basically raising a demon army. Like, again, and I talked about this previously, basically trying to make Inferno, like 1989 Inferno, happen again. Like Strife is very much on the cusp of making old school Inferno happen again, when pretty clearly like the Inferno event that's coming, the reboot, is not going to be a replicate of 1989. But Strife's kind of trying to make that happen. He's like, I'm gonna bring all my demons to Krakoa, it'll be sweet. Cable and friends come and stop him in this hell dimension, and they kill Strife ultimately, but before they do that, Strife's like, oh, you can't do that. I want I want amnesty, right? I want mutant amnesty. And the Cables, play it cute, and they're like, oh, I couldn't hear him, could you? And they kill him because he's their bitter rival and enemy. Would Strife have been allowed on Krakoa? Again, like almost certainly not. Like it seems like, based on the way Madeline Pryor was treated, based on the general like language we've seen around clones, like it seems like someone like a Strife would definitely be voted out by the Quiet Council. But again, like in avoiding the issue, we continue just not talking about it. And that is, I don't really care. Like, I don't actually think it makes sense to have Strife on Krakoa, but it's one of those things too, where it's like, oh, that's an interesting question that has been asked, and here is not going to happen. We also did definitely get confirmation, or at least apparent confirmation in this issue, that all the theorists who were like, oh, I think Teen Cable, he's actually Strife, that seems to not have been the case, although it seems that Esme, the Stepford Cuckoo he was dating him at least originally to figure that out. Like she was spying on him, and then, classic tales all the time, ultimately just wanted to date him, because she liked him and because he was a dumb boy who liked dumb boy things. Okay, so at the very end of Cable number 12, we end with the tease of, so these babies were stolen for, again, Strife, like basically replicating all of 1989's Inferno, and they're returned, these mutant twins, and one of them has a glowy eye, right? So one of the babies, that's the final panel, is like, okay, we have a Cable Strife clone returned to one of these families unknowingly. That could come up again, may or may not, down the road. We kind of just got to see like what the relevance of Old Man Cable is before I invest any excitement in that detail. Like I want to see it, and so that's what the Krakoan reads is the next time we're going to see Cable is Cable Reloaded, which is part of the Last Annihilation event. So I'll pause there for like 2 seconds, but I do want to hear any other questions, any other thoughts on, did Cable number 12 like totally stick the landing? Did it salvage Teen Cable for you? Any of this stuff? I'm seeing a general sense of like that was pretty solid. I like Teen Cable more than I expected. But again, like I don't think I'm seeing a lot of people who are like, Cable number 12, a masterpiece, a triumph. There's just not a lot of that, and it's not that. It's fine. It's okay. I've never been a massive Cable fan myself. I suppose I like the character, but like definitely in X-Men lore, I mean there are literal hundreds of Cable issues that I probably have not read, in his solo ongoing, especially like in the 90s stuff, So I think like there's holes in my knowledge, there's gaps that maybe could have helped me appreciate this more. But as is, I was not incredibly impressed by this, but it felt of a part. Certainly, if you've read all 11 issues to this point, and then you hopped in for number 12, I don't think you're going to be disappointed. If you're expecting it to change after 11 issues, you need to reevaluate your expectations for art, because that's just not how stories work. So, all right, in Sword number 7, though, we do get, so that's where Cable Reloaded is going to come. And I think we'll get to that in a second, but let's talk generally here, I think, about Sword number 7, how the Last Annihilation affects mutants in Krakoa. Because I think that's probably the biggest question right here is like, Sword keeps getting caught up in crossovers. Okay? Sword, through its first 10 issues, we're only at 7 here, but by the time we get to issue number 10, half of Sword issues will have tied into some event. King in Black, Hellfire Gala, the Last Annihilation. Maybe Inferno by the end of that. I don't know, right? Like, we don't 100% know. But it's super tie-in heavy, okay? And I talked about this, I tweeted about it and wrote about it a little bit. Al Ewing is incredible at tie-in comics, okay? He's one of the best writers in the game. He's one of the best writers at Marvel, and he is supernaturally good at tying in his books to events and making the comics still work, right? And finding a way to still tell his story. And this is why I was less down on Sword as a King in Black tie-in than a lot of people, because again, Sword is the mutant space program. If there's a giant space threat, it makes sense that they should play a role in that. Like, that was actually a good way to test the waters for what Sword is. I think it went for an issue, maybe an issue and a half too long. It didn't need tie-in as long as it did. But nonetheless, he's incredibly good at tie-ins. And the difference, like the biggest difference with Sword number 7 here is this ties into the Last Annihilation. This is an Al Ewing event, right? This is running through his Guardians of the Galaxy. This is running through his vision for what Marvel Cosmic is going to be. Again, he's going to be writing Cable Reloaded, which is a tie into this event. It's like there's only like, I don't know, like a Wakanda issue, maybe Wiccan and Hulkling, like 2 issues he's not writing. You can find the full reading order, of course, over on comicbookherald.com. But it's like, this is his event. So Sword it's planned to be a part of this. That's a very intentional thing. I'm not worried about like this getting sucked into a tie-in where it didn't belong. It belongs, right? Like it is meant to fit there. I mean, here's the thing. X-Men are a cosmic universe now, okay? X-Men comics are a part of a cosmic universe. I've been seeing X-Men fans today talking about, Al Ewing's ability to make them care about Marvel Cosmic. Like, this is particularly unique to him. And, like, listen, that may not be your preferred X-Men story, that's fine, but let's not pretend a franchise built on a Phoenix saga and with a heavy sci-fi cosmic component to Powers of 10 is new to Marvel Cosmic. Like, it's not at all. Marvel Cosmic has always been a part of the X-Men. Again, often not people's favorite parts. The Shi'ar stuff might be the thing where you tune out. That's fine, but it's always kind of been there. So, like, especially now, with the Powers of 10, with Hickman's vision, with Planet-Size X-Men, the X-Men are a cosmic universe. Things that happen in Marvel Cosmic are X-Men stories. Whether they are talked about in those terms or not, they are impacting what the vision for the mutants of Earth is going to be. Like, it's just ultimately, it really, really matters. So, stuff that happens across the galaxies in X-Men story now. How could it not be? That's where their sights are set. I think a lot of fans are still kind of missing this, understandably fixated on Krakoa as a nation. But big picture, Krakoa isn't that much more relevant than the Shi'ar moon where, like, Scott Summers tries on his Speedos, right? They're just places in the galaxy. What matters is what mutants plan and do there, and on Sword, on the Peak, and now on Mars, right? That is what matters. Again, as we look to, like, where is this thing going? Where is the end game? The end game is in space. The end game is in galactic societies. The end game is with the Phalanx. The end game is not Orca's first Krakoa, right? The end game is not treaties with the British about Krakoan trade. Those are fun details on the build to the end game, but that's not the end game. So, the Last Annihilation, it affects mutants and it affects Krakoa, and it's something Sword is going to take an interest in, and that's what we're seeing in Sword number 7, which is, to my knowledge, the only Sword issue that is going to tie into the Last Annihilation event, which is actually kind of surprising. And like, that's the other thing too with Al Ewing owning this and controlling what the Last Annihilation event is going to be, it's a very short, tight event. Like it's 7-ish issues. It's not going to be this sprawling mess across months and months like King in Black. Like this is a tight thing. It's like 3 Guardians issues, like 1.5 issues of Sword if you count like kind of a prelude, which I do in Sword number 6. And then again, these like one-shots. So like super tight crossover, you could read all of it. And again, I've been saying this, but if you are a fan of Sword, if you are a fan of the X-Men Cosmic side of things, and again, like I think if you're a fan of the Krakoa era, you kind of have to be. I think you should be reading anything Al Ewing's writing related to Marvel Cosmic, Guardians of the Galaxy included, which has been a pretty good book. So let's talk about what is actually happening in The Last Annihilation. And I'm curious what people think. Like, are people annoyed that this is the Last Annihilation event is happening and impacting Sword? Do you enjoy the role Sword can now play as the mutant space program and this arm, kind of like basically they're a mutant Guardians of the Galaxy is a very easy way to look at it. Like that is kind of what they're doing, but just, with all things mutant at the forefront. I'm curious what people think about that as well. All right, so we pick up as the Last Annihilation heats up. We have the Dread Dormammu, okay, longtime supernatural Doctor Strange villain back from the Stan Lee and Steve Ditko days in Strange Tales, and of course the villain of Doctor Strange in the MCU. Dormammu has possessed Ego the Living Planet, and who is a literal, living planet. So easier way to say that. And Dormammu is invading our galaxy. Okay, the galaxy where our characters live. His mindless ones are attacking the Skrull and Kree throne worlds, among other places. So we see pretty much right off the bat in Guardians of the Galaxy, the growing Guardians of the Galaxy team is, facing off against these mindless ones. We have King Teddy Altman, aka Hulkling, is now the king of space. He's the king of the Skrull and Kree empires. They came together in the event Empire, spelled with a Y, which was fine, but it's nice to see it paying off, and it's nice to see Ewing's vision paying off in these issues. And we see them basically fending for their lives and fending for their society as these mindless ones enter the system, and Dormammu enacts what Ewing is calling the Last Annihilation. And I'm curious why it would be called that. I mean, I do think like that title is pretty evocative of Marvel Cosmic, right? And what is important in the Marvel Cosmic landscape, because 2006's 2007's Annihilation event was absolutely a game changer in Marvel Cosmic. That is technically it starts a little bit earlier. Like there's a Drax mini and there's some stuff like the Thanos Starlin and stuff in the early 2000s. Again, Jim Starlin being the architect and the godfather of all of this. But Annihilation, that event, it really changed the game for Marvel Cosmic. It started off a really cool era from like 2006 through like 10, 11, where Marvel Cosmic ruled. Like, there's really, really awesome stuff that happened there. So references to Annihilation have been very prevalent at Marvel over the last few years. I trust Ewing to do it justice with what he's calling the Last Annihilation, and to like actually have the good sense to try to put this idea of an annihilation to rest. The coolest thing about the original Annihilation is it's literally the Negative Zone and Annihilus, these longtime Fantastic Four villains, attacking like all of the galaxy and everything we know in the Marvel Cosmic landscape. And it sticks almost entirely to space. Earth doesn't really get caught up in it, which is kind of cool to keep it as its own thing. But again, it's Annihilation. It is everything under threat. The entirety of the Nova Corps is wiped out. Like there's all this massive, massive devastation. And it's a hard thing to one up. It's a hard thing to keep having annihilations where you're like, and now this thing, and now this villain, and they're back, and the Phalanx do it in Annihilation Conquest, which is, actually kind of interesting in retrospect. But doing it called the Last Annihilation, starting with that same kind of idea of someone coming from another dimension, in this case Dormammu from the Dread Dimension, but actually putting to bed that thing recurring and happening over and over again. I like that idea. I hope that it actually puts it to bed. I mean, that's going to be the crucial thing here, right? They actually need to kind of get in a new idea and kind of freshen it up. And that's, the thing that we're seeing with all the events that are in all the Marvel comics and properties that are doing a good job right now. They're freshening up what the concept is and trying to get away from sort of stale tropes, right? You have Hickman getting away from that in X-Men, and of course you have Ewing doing it very famously on Immortal Hulk. So Last Annihilation hopefully is getting there. And let's talk a little bit too about like what is actually happening in this comic. Because Sword number 7, as a tie-in, I talked about Ewing being this master at tie-ins. I talked about Al Ewing sort of never missing, when it comes to like writing events and writing good tie-ins. This tie-in's actually a little weird. I don't actually think it works as well as a lot of his other stuff. And let's get into that. But we have writer Al Ewing, we have artist Stefano Caselli, we have colors here by Fer Cifuentes Sujo, and letters by Ariana Maher. Okay, so my biggest issue with Sword number 7 is it feels about 70% straight up like an issue of Guardians of the Galaxy. It really does. Apart from the Doctor Doom and Storm dinner, which is great and is post-Hellfire Gala, affairs of state, Storm now is the Region of Mars, having a dinner with Doctor Doom. Like, apart from that, which is obviously very X-Men and very Sword, we have Mindless Ones, busting into fighting basically Teddy. Like, we basically get this through the vision of Hulkling, the King of the Kree and the Skrull, and his battle with them, and they break his magic sword, Excelsior, right? Like, the Mindless Ones have him on the ropes. It feels a lot like an issue of Guardians. It's a little too Guardians heavy. I want more Sword in my Sword comics, I think, is a fair criticism here. I think as tie-ins go, it's going to make a lot of sense with The Last Annihilation if you're reading all of Guardians. If you're not, Al Ewing is saying things like, oh, don't worry, like you can just read Sword and you'll be fine. I actually don't think that's true here. I actually think this is going to not, it's not going to be as enjoyable if you're not familiar with Guardians. I'm sure there will be people who will be like, oh, I only read Sword and I got it. It's fine. Yeah, you can, like, right? Context clues are there, but it's definitely going to be better if you're familiar with what's happening in Guardians of the Galaxy. And again, like, this event isn't that long. It's easy to do, but I actually think that's a weakness in Sword where it's not really specifically a Sword story, although by the end of it, it becomes that. There's a lot of cool callbacks in this issue, right, from Empire setting up this moment. It was Empire Aftermath, the Avengers, and we're at the wedding of Billy and Teddy, and at that scene, Abigail Brand basically calls out Carol Danvers and is like, hey, you suck. You really should have called Sword into, or you should have called, Alpha Flight, which is what she's running at that point. Should have called us in on this Empire thing, this whole invasion thing. You didn't do it. I'm going to leave. We got a cool tease then at the end of that where Abigail Brand showed up and there was this future tease about like, oh my gosh, she's going to be part of the X-Men. That dropped like basically right as I was already publishing or finalizing my How the X-Men Will Conquer the Galaxy, so then that really tied into that nicely in that video. But long story short, it was like, okay, Abigail Brand is going to be leading, an X-Men-led Sword division. That happened, a year-ish ago, and we actually see that moment now as Abigail Brand busts onto the world where Teddy's fighting and comes to his rescue, right, and steps in and does it entirely for Alliance purposes, And we also have a cool callback here, too, of Doom speaking the lines to Storm that he was quoted as saying in Sword number 1. The quotes that are used in those little, bookend quote pages from Doctor Doom, which was super exciting at the end of Sword number 1, because Doom doesn't show up in that comic, but we actually get a quote from him at the end of it, and it was like, oh, amazing, what role is he going to play? Well, we actually see that delivered here now in Sword number 7, with him telling Storm basically the equivalent of, ooh, be careful, you're playing with Firestorm, which Storm does not take kindly to, which is great. So that whole scene's incredible. I like Ewing's ability to do those callbacks. The whole Storm Doom dinner is just like callback overload. It's definitely very much in response to that time that during the Chris Claremont era where Doctor Doom and Arcade, he like invites Storm to dinner in Latveria or has her into dinner, which is basically like what every villain did at that point. Like Dracula, Doctor Doom, they were all like, "Ooh, Storm's a babe. Let's have her to dinner." And Doctor Doom ultimately, like, he winds up freezing her in basically like Han Solo carbonite, even though it's not that, which is like living hell for Storm, of course. But not the best dinner in retrospect, but there's a lot of callbacks to that as well. There's reference here to Doom's, he refers to Storm being like, oh, it's good to see you as a queen and not just a king's wife, which is, I guess, a pot shot at Storm being queen of Wakanda, which is still like a pretty cool thing to do. And then Storm is immediately like, oh, do you really want to bring up our marriages? Because in the pages of Fantastic Four, I think it's issue like 33 in the Dan Slott run, Doctor Doom's marriage literally just fell apart. Like, I guess I was reading up on this today because I'm not reading Fantastic Four, and I don't want to be. Really, I'm not enjoying the Dan Slott era at all. But I was curious, like, okay, what actually happened with Doctor Doom's wedding here? Like, who was he going to marry? I thought it'd be something gross, like it was Valeria or something. But it was, I guess, it was Victorious, and which is this like basically like Latverian. I don't know. I don't even know if like Doctor Doom created her or what exactly how it plays out. But he was going to marry Victorious, and then it turned out that Johnny Storm has slept with Victorious, so Doctor Doom was like, ew, gross. Didn't want to do it anymore. So anyway, his marriage fell apart right at the altar. So Storm brings that up, which is a pretty nice burn on good old Doomsy. But long story short, like having Doctor Doom be regal and say things like, I only open my mouth grill for delectable foods or whatever the line is. It was very funny, but very sort of doomish regal. Having him talk like that and be that pompous Doom, but then also get taken down and put in his place by Storm, that's a perfect character dynamic for me as a reader of those characters. I love Doctor Doom. I love him as a villain. I love him as an anti-hero. But again, like in this era, we have literally seen in Fantastic Four X-Men crossover written by Chip Zdarsky, we have seen Doom create his own Sentinels. We have seen Doom imprison-ish the Latverian mutants on an island so he can run experiments on them. Like, again, like it's easy to sort of be like, Doom's so cool, I love him. He's also a tyrannical monster. And Storm puts him in his place here very, very appropriately. Now that she is Region of Mars, I'm excited to see Storm like really take charge on a lot of issues. And Doom also, he doesn't have much to say to her. You know, like the things that he says that are interesting is he talks about how SWORD went into upper space, the upper cosmos, whatever you're going to call this, like the white hot room and all this kind of crazy conceptual stuff. And they go in with their mutant technology and they took Mysterium, right? They took Mysterium, they took this miracle metal, and now they're using that as galactic currency. And Doctor Doom is actually interesting in terms of like understanding the cosmos in that on that level, on his ability to sort of articulate what was happening there, but then also to say like, hey, you sort of like you're playing with these massive forces, like this could release things that are unintended consequences. But it's also like, Doom, who are you to say, right? Which is basically Storm's comeback, which is like, we're going to listen to that from you. So I don't know exactly why Doom is giving them this warning, other than just trying to do that classic thing of like, I know what you did and look how smart I am kind of thing. Unless Doctor Doom was alluding to like, hey, Dormammu's here and it's your fault, you know, potentially, or being like, hey, you took this Mysterium thing and something even bigger is going to come now, and it's a tease for something to come, right? That's interesting, but Storm's having none of it. The other really interesting thing that happens in Sword number 7 is Abigail Brand. So she brings the team to go rescue Teddy. It's like throughout the whole issue, they're like, we tried to call Alpha Flight, they wouldn't answer. And it's like, Alpha Flight sucks. Of course they didn't answer. But also they're led by Henry Peter Gyrick here, which I had forgotten. So they super suck. But it's like Abigail Brand shows up. She's going to be the hero. But what's excellent about that is Abigail Brand reveals in a redacted data page that she actually blocked the distress signal to Alpha Flight / Henry Peter Gyrick, so it never got to the Avengers, right? So Brand has plans here to sort of sneakily to make Teddy reliant on her, right? To come and save the day so that this alliance grows stronger, where now the Kree Skrull Empire is like more in the X-Men's pocket, right? More in Sword's pocket specifically, because that's the other thing is like Abigail Brand references here plans she doesn't want the Council to know about, right? Like Abigail Brand as leader of Sword is not in the Quiet Council's pocket. She is not in Magneto's pocket. She is not playing mutant baseball even necessarily, right? Like she's not in on Professor X and Moira Magneto's plans. She's doing her own thing, right? And whatever her own thing is, she does not want them to know about. So that's really interesting to me. I think Brand is uniquely Machiavellian in the Krakoa era. You know, like she's actually rivaled probably only by the likes of like Moira, Charlie, you know, Mag's daddy and Beast. You know, actually her former romantic partner, maybe still, I don't know. Maybe Apocalypse, pre-Ten of Swords. You know, these are the character, Mr. Sinister, I guess, Mystique. Characters with a plan, right? These are some of the most interesting characters. Characters with a plan, characters with strategy, characters who are going to do big, interesting things. Abigail Brand is quickly, very, very high on that list. So yeah, I mean, Sword number 7, again, it's good. It's not actually as good as a Sword comic as you would think, because it's more of a Guardians comic, and it really is. It's really integral to the Last Annihilation event, which is happening right now. So if you're all in on that, I think it works. If you're not, you might have felt like you got cheated out of, I don't know, 40, 50% of a comic or something. So, all right, I'm going to get a drink of water here. Let me know any more questions you got coming. I'm going to read some more questions here from the Super Chat. I saw a few pour in. Thanks so much, everybody, for asking. Okay. One question here was, can I understand Sword number 7 without reading any of the Guardians of the Galaxy or Last Annihilation? I've only read X-Men titles and don't plan on reading anything else. I think you can, but not as easily as the creators are indicating that you can. And honestly, it really just depends on your comfort level on putting things together with context clues. I mean, this is chapter 2 in an event. You can figure out what happened in chapter 1 through context clues, but you will have missed chapter 1. If you're comfortable with that, great. If you're not, I would actually say no. I would actually say maybe just skip to the Doom and Storm stuff, because that's entirely based on what happened in Sword and Hellfire Gala. We got a question here from Marcos. He says, what is your opinion regarding this imminent threat Doom has been talking about? The timing of this narrative makes me think that he's alluding to Chthon in the upcoming Darkhold saga. So, that's interesting. I thought, my initial read on it was just a reference to, like, maybe them stealing Mysterium was what allowed Dormammu to break through. That actually would be kind of boring, so I think it would be cooler if it was something like a Chthon and whatever's going to happen in the Darkhold saga. I don't have a ton of confidence that the Darkhold saga, which is going to be written, at least bookended by Steve Orlando, I don't have a ton of confidence that that's going to be like a super X-heavy kind of event, honestly, or like have major ramifications. I mean, there's a little weirdness with whatever's going on with the Darkhold right now because it's going to be a Wanda Maximoff story, but she's dead for the Hellfire Gala, and we're going to have a whole trial of Magneto to deal with that. I mean, is that going to last a long time? I doubt it, but I'd be a little surprised if it was tied in that directly with the Darkhold. My guess actually would be it's probably going to be something bigger and way more cosmic than any of that. I think probably the best answers here would be like in Sword number 1, Al Ewing references all these cosmic artifacts and places, again, like the White Hot Room, like the Heart of the Universe, like Mysterium. I think it'd be a lot cooler if it's actually some sort of massive cosmic entity on that level. Whether it's the literal Mysterium character from Squadron Supreme, whether it's the one above all, the one below all from Immortal Hulk, right? Those sorts of things. I think that'd be a lot cooler. I'll be curious what Doom's role in all that is, like what exactly that would be. Because if it's just Dormammu, it's basically just him teasing the Last Annihilation, which is already happening, which would be a little disappointing. So, how do you think Wiccan and Hulkling are going to find out about the Scarlet Witch? And what do you think Brand's plan is with Storm? Yeah, there is an interesting moment here in Sword where, Teddy references like, oh yeah, Billy really hates when you keep calling his mom the worst person in the world, keep calling her the Great Pretender. And, he was like, oh, I tried to call her. That's weird. She didn't answer. And Abigail Brand's like, yeah, that is weird. Wonder why that happened. Which, as we know from the end of the Hellfire Gala and X Factor number 10, Scarlet Witch, Wanda Maximoff is dead. So they don't tell her here. Billy and Teddy are obviously going to find out at some point. How do I think that's going to happen? Hopefully when the funeral happens. It'd be pretty weird not to invite them. So I'm going to get some Trial of Magneto. We see some of that. I don't know how much of that we'll actually see there. What do you think Brand's plan is with Storm? It's an interesting question. I think Brand is accounting for galactic expansion with the X-Men, and that is the thing that she's interested in. So it's interesting to consider whether Brand at this point are on opposite ends, like with Storm, like are they going to be diametrically opposed in terms of what they want to do, or are their visions basically the same? Because I think like with Storm, her role as Regent of Mars is going to, is overseeing that, but also like she is overseeing the capital of the Sol system. So is Storm going to be interested in expansion in a way that Brand is like, that actually doesn't serve, that serves mutant benefits, but that doesn't serve protecting this galaxy benefits? I could see them being at odds in that regard, because Brand's whole thing is like, I want to protect our galaxy and our Earth from invasion and from threat. She's not necessarily that bought into, or at least doesn't seem to be that bought into the idea of like it doesn't matter to her as much for mutant survival. It matters to her is like that their territory survives because that's her job and that's what she can control and that's what she's good at. You know, she is. I mean, it's the shortest analogy, but it's like Nick Fury on Earth. Abigail Brand is that for space. You know, she will do anything to protect like all of their interests in space and keep them from threat and keep them from harm. So, I mean, I think like if Storm's vision, whatever it's going to be, is region of Mars, which I'm really curious to see because I don't totally know exactly what that's going to look like. I could see Brand not necessarily being as on board with like mutant expansion specifically, you know, unless it creates further defenses and further leverage, which is what mutant expansion did in Sword Number 6 when they revealed Mysterium. That created leverage for all of the territories that Brand is interested in protecting. So the fact that it's mutant money, essentially, that doesn't really matter. It creates leverage for all of them. All right, we had a question here in the super chat too. I'll get to all these next. Do you think Adam X might have any relevance in the Sword series at any point in regards to his involvement with the Shi'ar throne? Not really. I mean, not really. Although, I mean, so the only two issues of X-Men Legends that I've had any time for were those Adam X issues, actually, because they did officially confirm something that was long rumored. The next X-Men Legends is a bust. Like X-Men Legends is, I find it very boring. It fits right into a bunch of X-Men comics that we're rereading through My Marvel this year, and it's just like, why are we picking these stories in these times beyond just trying to get classic famous creators' work? You know, like I love the Simonsons, Louis Simonson, Walt Simonson, good work, like all around. Made some great comics. I would love to continue reading Walt Simonson's Ragnarok. That's a great series that is happening right now. But like, I don't need them going back to random X Factor stuff. Like there wasn't a heck of a lot of point to that. I think X-Men Legends would only be interesting to me if you got the creators on board to actually be a part of what's happening now, right? If you get the X Factor crew to go back and do an Apocalypse story with what we know about Apocalypse now, that's interesting. Peter David right now is doing his X Factor. His new X Factor of the 90s. They're doing a story in between, I think it's issues 75 and 76, which I read somewhat recently. It's like, it doesn't add anything. It's just a story that happens to be from an era that some people like. And it's like, just go back and read the other, like the comics that exist then. Like, what is the point of this? I don't get it. Anyway, the tangent. What was the question? Do I think Adam X might have any relevance? Again, because those X-Men Legends things actually revealed something and actually had a point. I mean, it would not be the weirdest thing for Al Ewing to pull in Adam X. That seems like the type of continuity pull he could be interested in. Do I think he'll have involvement with the Shi'ar throne? Whew. I mean, the only way that would make any sense is if we're really doing a very Summers family heavy kind of story. And I actually suspect we'll kind of transition away from that the longer this goes. I think there's still all that Vulcan stuff we have to do. I mean, it would not be weird to bring Adam X into this and have 4 Summers brothers and just kind of expand the family and just kind of embrace it. But I wouldn't bet money on it. I don't necessarily love that. All right, we got a question here from Brandon. Brandon asks, love Storm's burn on Doom's new marriage. Okay, yep. Pun intended. Oh, Johnny. Yep, fair. Well, way to go, Johnny Storm. But do you think he might be right and she might blow it? She might make a mistake. I mean, a couple thoughts here. Doom's always like a little right? That's what makes him an interesting villain. That's what makes him an interesting character. Storm specifically blowing it, like what would that mean? Like Storm didn't go up and grab everything and grab the Mysterium. You know what I mean? Like that's a Sword program before she was even there. So for Sword to be at fault really in any capacity, I don't really buy that. I think for like for seeing all of mutant kind making mistakes in doing that, sure. I mean, they're playing with forces that they probably don't comprehend. I think that's probably true, and it is a very good Doom characterization to say, like, basically, like, I know this. I'm Dr. Doom. I could do this. I could play with those forces, but nobody else could do that. No one else could do that successfully. And that's a very good Doctor Doom characterization. So I think, it's arrogance. There's a little bit of rightness because the mutants are playing with forces they don't comprehend, but it's like, I don't know what those consequences are going to be. And the fact that Doom doesn't totally seem to know either, again, he's very coy about it. He's very coy. He's like, oh, something bad might come. Does Doom actually know what that is? Or is it just like a very, vague allusion to him knowing things that Storm doesn't know? It feels like the latter. So I think one thing that I'm hoping we see from Storm in this era, now that she is Regent of Mars, and now that she is having, hopefully, this glow-up post-Marauders, is like, Storm is on Doom's level. Like, as a leader, as a character, certainly on a power set. You know what I mean? I want to see shrewd Storm. I want to see this character planning and outsmarting people. Don't just blast them with lightning. Outsmart them. Have stronger plans, right? Have great strategy. What is Storm's strategy for mutant kind? Again, like when I talk about the interesting schemers in the X-Men era, it's everyone who is scheming with some sort of thing. It's Abigail Brand, Professor X, Moira, Mr. Sinister. Put Storm in that conversation. I would love to see that. So might Doom be right that they awakened something in grabbing Mysterium that they didn't expect to? I kind of hope so. That sounds like an interesting cosmic story. But nonetheless, I want to see Storm being the one who helps them blow that back, right? Who helps them fight that back and figure things out. So I think that'd be pretty cool. All right, let's talk about the final issue here that came out today somewhat briefly. And again, get in any questions, get in any super chat now. I'm definitely going to be closing things out after we talk Wolverine number 14. Ooh, I'm seeing a comment here from Nero. Doom may stoke Storm's magical potential. That's a good call out. That is an interesting call out. If you remember back in the Storm and Magic miniseries from 1984-ish, 85, the Storm of Limbo in Belasco's realm, she is a magician. She has magic in her. Does the Storm that we know in Earth 616, the region of Mars, could she develop that in the ways that Doom has and fight back these magical threats, whether it's a Chthon or whatever? How do you say that? Chthon? It's probably Chthon. I don't know. I think it's, what is it? Cthulhu? It's Cthulhu, not Chthulu. I think I've said it in my head, Chthulu, for a long time, and that's probably less frightening, right? Like if you see the squid and you're like, hey, Chthulu, that's probably not as scary. Probably not as unknowable. But yeah, that's the extent of my Lovecraft commentary for the moment. But yeah, let's talk about this. Wolverine number 14. Okay, this issue follows up on Shi'ar Logic Diamonds delivered during the Hellfire Gala. We have the Marauder and Christian Frost were attacked and never made it to the Cerebro cradles on Krakoa where they were intended to be delivered. Okay, we got writer Ben Percy, artist Adam Kubert, colors Frank Martin, letters by Corey Pettit. I liked Wolverine number 14 a fair amount. I think it's probably my favorite new direction for this book. So Wolverine number 14 was very much teased as the return of Solemn. Solemn was teased as Wolverine's new archvillain, who occurred and came into prominence in Ten of Swords. We did not get a lot of Solemn during that event, but he was pretty cool. He was an interesting antagonist for Wolverine. He kind of outsmarted him. He could outfight him. He has adamantium skin. Good protagonist, kind of changes the game. And we're in an era where Wolverine doesn't have Sabretooth to bounce off. All the standard sort of Wolverine threats were very rooted in mutantdom. And Krakoa obviously shakes that up. I don't totally know, like the Weapon Plus program, like Weapon X, like that hasn't been a big player in this era either. It's kind of muted and transformed into other things. So giving Wolverine a Solemn who ties us, and we saw at the end of Ten of Swords, Solemn escapes to Earth, right? So we know Solemn's there. We know we have Araco mutants who are mostly on Mars, but some of them are still seemingly running amok in Madripoor, because we have this giant monstery guy, basically an intriguing mystery, wreaking havoc and stealing the Cerebro stuff. And basically by the end of this, what we reveal is that the giant monster guy, who is a Arakian pirate, he is basically being, jerked around by Solemn. Okay, and Solemn shows up for literally one panel, but just like as a mention. Okay, so it's actually, initially I was like, oh no, Solemn, that's kind of disappointing. It's actually a cool setup where Solemn again is a schemer. He's a strategist. He is thinking through like what comes next, and that's going to make this arc interesting because again, we have not seen Arakian characters developed in really any significant capacity. Very, very small moments here and there. We have Core of the Burning Heart bouncing around with swords. She got literally a line of dialogue in today's issue. Iska the Unbeaten has obviously had some cool moments, but we kind of already know her deal from Ten of Swords. And then, of course, in Planet-Size X-Men, we get some new sort of Omega-level Arakko mutants. But again, not a lot about them, just sort of power sets. So it's this huge untapped source of mutants and new characters for this era to play with. I'm really excited for Wolverine to be playing with it. You know, Solemn's masterminding this affair. We know they stole, or someone has stolen Logic Diamonds. I'm more into this than anything in Wolverine so far, probably. Like, yes, give me more Solemn, give me more Eric characters, and let's see where that goes. Now, you know, we do have to call it too. Sage has some cool info for Wolverine here, functioning on an X-Force capacity, where the Russians are trying to get Logic Diamonds because they have the Cerebro Sword, which is a callback to, again, like Percy's Wolverine and X-Force. I mean, it is one run. Like, it is one thing. Everything here, it's like, I can barely remember what's Wolverine and what's X-Force at this point. It all blends together tremendously. But we know the Russians have Cerebro Sword. We saw Mikhail Rasputin get that to some of them. It might also be Orcus involved, I think, if memory serves. I guess they need these Sierra Logic Diamonds to, like, power up their own Cerebro Sword, and see what they can do with that. So, and then we have, you know, Sage navigating the data about the Arakko Pirate Syndicate called Bone Clutch, which, like, yes, give me Arakko Pirate Syndicates. Like, I want to see so much more of that in this era of X-Men. It's such an amazing, amazing opportunity. So the Krakoan for the next issue reads Enemy of My Enemy, which, you know, probably just means Wolverine and our boy, this pirate captain, trying to track down Solemn. So I'm here for it. So again, all in all, strong day of comics. I was happily surprised by Wolverine number 14. Sword number 7 was good, if more tie-in heavy than I thought it would be. And Cable number 12 was the end of that series, and an appropriate end that it was. So I think I got to all of the super chat questions. If anyone has any final stuff here, I want to fire them off really quickly. That would be just fine. Let me just make sure I got the questions here. Looks like I did. All right, cool. Thanks everybody for joining. I really appreciate having you here. Again, I'm going to be trying to do this basically every Wednesday at the end of the day, after we've all hopefully read the comics, or even if you haven't, obviously you can hop on and just talk through the day's X-Men comics. You know, I think right now, again, we're in a state of Krakoa. We're in a place where there's not a lot of, like, massive stuff happening. You know, we're kind of chasing threads and kind of finishing up some Reign of X stuff before we get to the really, really big stuff that's going to be happening in Trial of Magneto and in Inferno. So I think, like, on a, oh my gosh, this huge thing happened level, there's just not going to be too much of that. But that doesn't mean the comic can't be good. That doesn't mean they can't be interesting. And that doesn't mean they can't, you know, be asking really interesting questions. So again, thanks everybody for joining. I really appreciate you hopping on here. Again, subscribe to Comic Book Herald. You can click that little icon there in the bottom right corner to easily subscribe. You'll know when I'm going live with Casual Krakoa here in the future. But again, pretty much every Wednesday into the near future, I try to do them, you know, basically after 5:15 Central Time is typically when I'm able. I do have a question here. No more Eason Eternals. So that was a series that I had started with the Eternals with the Kieran Gillen and Esad Ribic run. I'm still very much enjoying the run. I need to read issue 6. That came out today. And I think it sounds like there will be a pause, maybe some one-shots after that. I think after issue 6, if it feels meaty enough, I'll probably try to dig into it a little bit. I have been having a lot of fun, honestly, going back and connecting old Eternals stories to what's happening with the Eternals in this current Gillen written run, which again I like. It's good. And Esad Ribic is fantastic. But it's, you know, that's, again, it's like Eternals is one of those rare Marvel things where, like, I know so little. You know, I've read the Kirby, but it's like there's not that much, but it's also like I just know so little about the Eternals, so it's kind of cool to actually have a Marvel thing that I don't feel like I know a ton about, because that's a little rarer and rarer these days. But yes, I don't know that I'll make a video. We'll see how exciting issue number 6 is, how Thanosy it is. If it's real Thanosy, I'll probably get on it. But we'll see. We'll see about Eason Eternals. So, all right. Thanks, everybody, for listening. If I don't see any additional questions, I think it's time to wrap it up. Have a great rest of your evening. Thanks for joining. And as always, enjoy the comics.